My name is Ted Fjellman. I'm the chair of this, and I will be moderating this session, this panel session. I'm an executive director of TechU and co-founded TechU together with Cindy. And of course, I'm very proud of the team and all the excellent company presentations that we've seen upstairs just now. If you didn't have a chance to ask all of your questions during the company pitches, the companies will be around for the rest of the afternoon to ask any questions. So this panel will go for 40 minutes. We will have a Q&A at the end of this, but I, of course, will introduce the speakers and go through a set of questions. And afterwards, we will go off into partnering meetings and networking. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephen Mooney, who's here from the Department of International Trade as one of the many hats that he's wearing. He's actually developed and helped grow companies all over the world, specifically through helping them grow internationally by exporting to other countries or growing by doing collaborations across countries. So a very topical person to have on the panel for us today. Priya Guam, next up, is 20 years out of the diplomatic service in the Bay Area in San Francisco, but has come back to the UK, brought a US company over here to establish it here in the UK, and has helped incubate several companies through seed and Series A, and is now an investor for Miriam Ventures. Erman Turan, who is an angel investor out of Turkey, and is actually one of the investors who is about to set up a VC fund, is in the process, very end process of that, and is going to give us the Turkish perspective of an investor. And now, last but not least, Kristen Albright, who is a US investor who's come over to the UK 2 years ago, is actually working with me in a biotech company here in the UK, but is really representing the US venture capital perspective and the sort of US European venture capital perspective for those of you who are interested in that. I am switching to this, and I hope you can still hear me all right. Yep.
I think a little bit louder.
Okay, so we will have to project. Okay, so this panel is really about how to do business across borders and how to internationalize. And we'd like to start with Priya to tell us a little bit about your experience as a, from the Bay Area, from your work at Innovate UK. You sit on the council of Innovate UK, advising how to grow SMEs in the UK. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience in the internationalization of companies?
Sure. So just to start with, I'm assuming people have probably come across Innovate UK, but just for a little bit of context, Innovate UK is the part of UK research and innovation that focuses really on the commercialization end of the equation. So helping academics who want to commercialize their research, or also helping companies, large and small, be able to focus on R&D and really that transformational technological shift that we know needs to happen across literally every sector of our economy. There's colleagues here from Innovate who would be happy to talk to you a bit about that in more detail. As Ted said, I'm on the council there. It's like a non-exec role, so I'm part of the board there. And one of the big challenges we look at from the council side is how do we leverage global relationships to achieve the best for UK R&D in that. And clearly, one of the really great opportunities is the Newton Fund, which is behind the program that we're participating in today. And really, the globalization element is key for R&D because, as we all know, and I think everyone in the room would agree with this, the best brains are not within your own borders. And when you want to be able to do something to take your R&D, to take your business to the next level, actually being able to look beyond your own borders is probably one of the best opportunities for you. That applies both at the research end, but also at the commercialization end. And through many of my recent roles, both when I was Consul General for the UK government in San Francisco, and then more recently launching Rocket Space in the UK, a late-stage technology campus, and then now as an investor, I see companies that have made that journey to internationalize. So whether that's British startups who are looking to set up in the Bay Area, or indeed American companies who are looking to come over here, or many of the Turkish businesses that I met when I was at the UK Turkey Tech Conference just a couple of weeks ago. That journey is really key for the transition. And what are the things that you need to think about? Well, it's really about, what stage is your idea, what stage is your business, and what's going to make sense for you at that point in time. And I think one of the things that'd be interesting to delve into, Ted, and I know Stephen and others will have views on this, is what's the right point to be going international? What do you need to have in your business? What do you need to have in terms of team? What do you need to have in terms of funding? What do you need to have in terms of market traction already to make jumping international as the right next step for you?
And that's a key point for a lot of SMEs that actually have very limited resources, right? Because doing things internationally is quite resource intensive. You've got to communicate more than you would if you have someone just around the corner. Sometimes there's a language barrier and so on. Stephen, do you have a feeling that you have a sort of a formula sometimes that you advise companies how to deal with that, or when they should engage, as Priya says?
Well, it's a question not only of when, but where. So as an example, when I started a software company 20 years ago in Western Canada, we felt like that wasn't the market to internationalize, and so we did what most Canadians did at the time. We took it down to the valley and took fundraising down in the valley. And at that point, we were a business focused on sustainability. The market for particularly carbon management in the US was stagnant and probably still is. But we still had to make a really strong case to internationalize because we felt like Europe was going to be the big market to jump on that opportunity, because traditionally when you go for U.S. investment, they want to see you focused on the U.S. market first, and if you can succeed there, you can succeed anywhere. And it's why when I moved over to the UK, I recognized kind of the differences in the markets, right? That if you look at, for example, the financial services sector within the UK, and I'm going to somewhat make up a stat that's probably pretty true. If you look at the domestic versus the international market within the financial services, in the US it's probably 80% domestic and 20% international, whereas with the UK it's probably 20% domestic and 80% international. So if you're an SME and you're an international business, I think you have to look at where strategically that market can help you, give you the funds needed in order to expand. And then secondly, and this is a tougher question, is decide which markets actually have the best opportunity for your business. And you'd be surprised at how few businesses that I've advised actually have an expansion plan built into their sales strategy and their investment strategy. So it seems like a simple thing, but really actually just planning and having a business case for that expansion is something that's often overlooked by early stage companies.
And what about on the R&D side? I mean, when we have people collaborating, like the UK and Turkish companies that are part of TDEB, they're collaborating very early stage when some of them are close to market and even selling products, but others are very far from the market. Have anyone here, and I will ask all of you, have you got some experiences of R&D collaborations internationally that have worked really well? And again, what the trade-off is there? I don't know, Erman, you have obviously worked a lot in Sweden previously. You started a company there. You've been involved in cross-border R&D. Do you have any thoughts on what the benefits?
Actually, one of the things that if there are two companies, or it doesn't have to be a small or large companies, if they could just accommodate themselves really good, and if their collaboration leads to something like an end product, I think that's the first thing that they can collaborate in that sense. And the other one is like their communication as well. If they're communicating good in the business sense as well, it's not only the research part, because it has to lead something like a technological thing that they can just deliver to the market. And if the business side is also good, I think the collaborations end in a really good way. And if it just stays like an R&D like collaboration, it can be just doing something good, or just increasing one of the things in the company, or just one of the scientists would like to do something, but it's not going to be commercialized. I think the R&D collaborations doesn't end well in that sense. If they lead and if they think in the first day, the business side and the commercial side, I think it's the best way to collaborate with this kind of R&D collaborations.
I mean, just to add to that, Ted, I think what makes a partnership work, it's people going into it with the same objectives. And I think the beauty of a program like this is because people are coming together knowing that they want to get to the same place. So for academics across the world, actually, global partnerships are core to how academics function. You want to be associating with the best, and that best can be anywhere in the world. And so it is very natural for academics to be working across borders. Yes. But to your point, Erman, if you want to look at actually spinning out that R&D or commercializing that R&D, that's a very different equation. And so I think one of the fundamental questions is, are you all coming into it with the same objective? And if you are, then the opportunities are huge. But it's that sort of shared values and shared objectives from day one that can really make the difference.
Well, very good. And Kristen, the US fund, Osage Partners, which you were at, they had quite a unique model about university spin-outs, but that was also very international. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how hard or easy it was to take on something from a very different country?
Sure. So I was at a venture capital fund called Osage University Partners. It's $600 million US under management. And the investment model, which is very important, by the way, for a startup, when you go to an investment firm, to understand their investment model, because you might not just be a fit for them. So our investment model is investing in startups, commercializing IP from universities. So we went pretty early. So we went seed, Series A. We tracked universities in US, Canada, Singapore, and Israel. And then we would make an investment, usually a seed Series A, and follow on through a mezz and potentially even the IPO. But to go back, I don't think it's necessarily the international investment. I think as an investment fund, we looked at the same criteria no matter where the company was. So I think Priya and Stephen mentioned is the team. So the team, and knowing they need expansion plans or knowing they need commercialization is so important. That they have to have a strategic vision, they have to have both entrepreneurial spirit, but they also sometimes have to have done it before. And that's really hard to actually, as a startup, to realize that you want people around you, whether you're first-time CEO, first-time CSO, CTO, or even just a project manager, is you want some people around you who know they've done it before. So I think we could look cross-border, and yes, the financing is different, the talent pool is different, but I think from an investment perspective, we look at investments the same, no matter where you are in the world.
Good. Erman, you have a unique perspective on Turkey and the challenges that Turkey has in attracting investment. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that in general, and then we'll pass it back out to the whole panel? Okay. That'd be really good.
I think Turkey is one of the emerging VC industry right now, close to Europe, and that's because of some of the DAFs, like direct foreign investment companies and EBRD or EIF, and they see a really good potential in Turkey, especially in deep tech businesses. Erhan is also here, one of the first deep tech VC company which was founded in Turkey. And they also invest in really good companies, and I'm sure their pipeline is also really full. After some time, the government just realized that deep tech and this kind of VC industry is really important for internationalization, and then also like the global expansion of the Turkish companies. Well, maybe some of you don't know, but like 3 out of 10 exits in 2018 was Turkish companies, which were built in Turkey and which was a VC-backed company. So after these kind of exits, and the exits are coming up in the upcoming years. 3 out of 10 in Europe. 3 out of 10 in Europe, exactly. Yeah. So like 30% of the exits came from Turkey, VC-backed companies. And when we look at that side, the VC business is like really emerging with the help of also with the help of government. And there are a lot of VCs are coming up who are like establishing their firms in 2010. There are 6. Just I know, and there will be more CVC, like corporate venture capitalists as well in the Turkish ecosystem. Apart from that, the angels are really keen on investing in startups. Of course, they are not first looking at the deep tech companies, but their check size or their ticket size are getting bigger and bigger. And the gap between the angel investment and the VC business is getting closer. So I think there will be more co-investment opportunities with the angels and the VCs in Turkey. And then with the result of that one, there will be more international VC companies which will be investing in Turkish companies too. I mean, in 2020, there will be 3, as far as I know, but of course there will be more international companies coming to Turkey, like Sequoia Capital invested in one of the Turkish companies as well. And I think there will be more coming up in the next years as well.
And what do you think is the reason why Turkey has been so successful? 80 million people is a big country, but it's not a third of Europe. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's the science, to be honest, because there's a really untapped potential with the universities as well. there are a lot of research projects which didn't commercialize because of their academic concerns. Like when you see an academician, they would like to publish something. Maybe they don't think, first of all, the patenting that technology, or they don't think that there will be a spin-off company. But after these kind of initiations and the push of government, I can say, there will be more TTOs are establishing in Turkey. And last 10 years, there are a lot of TTOs which were supported by the government and by the universities in Turkey. And then a lot of spin-off companies coming up from there. Of course, there might be a lot of spin-offs, but there should be also like VCs coming up. And since the VCs are just picky and taking really picky investments to these kind of startups or spin-off, I think if the more VC companies are established in Turkey, there will be more investments also in Turkey too.
Right. Stephen, you've worked with Turkey a lot over the last few years.
Yeah, I agree with many of your points and have a few comments. I think good deals will get found, right? And actually, if you're a Turkish company that succeeds in Turkey, then you're a great company, right? Because we all know Turkey has some problems, and other regions that I work in, like South Africa and Mexico, remind me similarly, right? That there's really good technologies, and then these regions have enough of a market size to prove to be a funnel region that bring even more technology and more innovation. And I think it is just a matter of time before an ecosystem is built that's grassroots that stimulates more, right? And organically that happened in the Valley 30, 40 years ago. And often, you know, the number 100 guy into Facebook thought it was his reason for success, and he dumped all his money back into a startup, and that circulated and circulated. I just don't think that the UK didn't have the time to do that organically and opened up the ease of doing business for startups, which stimulated the kind of next generation of investment in an ecosystem. And I think regions like South Africa and to an extent Mexico, and definitely to an extent Turkey, are going to continue to generate an ecosystem for startups. I think at the principle, though, there's Turkish solutions to a Turkish problem that are Turkish solutions to a global problem. And that's at a certain level right now where the world is a bigger community, and you need to look beyond that, right? And then, you know, with the companies that I've worked with in Turkey, ideally, or internationally as a whole, ideally when they start to get success and get the access to capital to enter the other markets, usually in the same way that Facebook example happens, money will start funneling back to Turkey to create this ecosystem. I think in parallel to the growing rise of early stage investment in Turkey, hopefully there can be some restrictions on the way of doing business there, right? It's difficult to actually take something from a good university, as Gökhan you can attest, and spin that into a really good company that can then take on the world. So the more partnerships on the investment front, the better, because it opens up Turkey to the global opportunities in those markets that I talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to pick on Stephen's point there, we have, you know, very great series of examples of strong tech ecosystems across the world that governments can pick and choose the right policies from and replicate them in their own country. This isn't about reinventing the wheel. This is about actually saying, you know, if we want to stimulate growth in certain ways, these are some of the things that we can do. And actually, very importantly, these are some of the things we can't do, i.e. we should step back from certain areas, because some of this is just letting innovation thrive, not actually actively intervening. You know, the UK, as Stephen was saying, you know, didn't just, you know, organically develop the tech ecosystem we have now. It's actually partly due to a series of very sensible interventions that happen to stimulate both entrepreneurship, but also secondly, investment into that sector. Things like, you know, schemes to reduce tax on intellectual property that's developed in the UK. Things like schemes to reduce the tax burden on investing in early stage startups. And actually, you know, anywhere, any global ecosystem that's thinking about how to sort of make a leap in terms of developing their own domestic tech ecosystem can just look at that and cherry pick the menu that works. And so, you know, my strong advice for everybody is just, you know, look at what's worked elsewhere and then replicate it domestically.
And I guess, I mean, we talk about Turkey, we talk about the opportunities for the UK in other places, but actually we have to remember that, and maybe especially because of what's happening with the European Union and Brexit, is that actually people also have to choose the UK, right? So if we think about the four of us, let's talk a little bit about why UK. Why should all these wonderful Turkish companies actually be coming and doing collaborations with us? Now, it's because we had the backing from the Newton Fund to go there and find them, and they came here. But they can go to the US, they can go to Singapore. I would like to start with you, Kristen. You've traveled the world a lot. You are an American who could command a much bigger salary in the US, but you're here in London. And why are you here in London?
Maybe you pay her to listen to you. I don't know.
That's for you.
I think at the end of this, we're going to have a vote to increase Kristen's salary.
Yay.
Yeah, so actually, there is so much capital in the UK and access to capital. What we forget is the UK is really a bridge between the US and Europe. And I hope it stays that way. I mean, Brexit obviously is top of mind on everyone. And will there be a deal? How will they exit? I mean, those questions still remain unanswered. But for instance, I know a lot of VC funds, for instance, that are putting billion-dollar funds in London, coming from US money here because they want access to the technology, the universities. As Stephen mentioned, there is a deal in every country. There's a deal in every university. There's a great deal no matter where you go. You can go to Russia, Australia, Thailand. I mean, you name the country, there's good technology. It's just getting the right people around it. So from my perspective, I think the UK will thrive. I think hopefully the currency holds, because that's always the biggest issue is the currency risk investing in UK, Europe, and US. But I truly think it's going to be a bridgeway between bringing the US capital to Europe and the European investors and meeting them up in London. So I think for me, I was so surprised that access to capital was the biggest surprise for me in UK.
May I say the word that so many people are lacking to say, which is valuation. How many Americans come to the UK or Europe because they get better, companies for cheap?
Yeah, so you see particularly in biotech, so I've been in the pharma industry for about 15 years, spanning from big pharma of J&J down to mid-sized public and private companies as well as venture-backed, as well as being an investor. Valuations in Europe are low. You can get a lot more bang for your euro, dollar, pound, whatever currency we're going to talk in. You can get a lower valuation in Europe. So a lot of American companies are coming here. The currency exchange is great right now for the euro to the US dollar. And you can easily buy 25% of a company with a great technology. The teams, for instance, many have moved to Boston area or San Francisco. And a lot of the human capital is actually going back to the countries in Europe where they came from and actually putting their talent back into the talent pool, starting new companies, and helping to raise capital. So I actually think the valuation here is significantly lower than the States, but the technology is just as good.
And Erman, on that note, if you're thinking about Turkey, similarly, Turkey has exported great talent to all over the world.
Yep.
Yeah. And do you see some of that returning? I mean, you yourself have done that. You've gone back to Turkey. You're setting up a VC fund there. What made you go back to Turkey?
Well, there are a lot of things to discuss about that one, but one of the things is I'm from Turkey, so I'm Turkish. So that's why maybe I can just put that one on that cherry, as a cherry on the cake. And on top of that one, I think the distance I can say about the other question that you were asking, I think it's so easier to come to here than to go to States for a Turkish company. We are just talking about collaboration and R&D collaboration and commercialization stuff. And I think the time distance and the physical distance is so much between Turkey and the States. So when you have to collaborate, you have to communicate. And because of that time lag, maybe it's also very convenient for Turkish people or Turkish companies to find a base in London, or at least to start commercialization their company in here. And then, as also mentioned, it can be an open gate for the States market as well after here. And the other question that you asked, why did I come to Turkey, or why did I establish the VC, or why the brain drain that we can talk? Yeah. Of course, there are a couple of times in Turkey there are good things happening and bad things are happening, and sometimes people just get frightened about the things and they just go, and then after some time they just come back. 2 years, like last 2 years, maybe there are a lot of computer scientists just go to other countries, especially in UK, I can say, in other European countries or states. But they are coming back right now because they see that, of course, there are opportunities, but there are also really good opportunities in Turkey right now as well. So I think it's like a temporary brain drain, I say, and they're fortunately come back after a couple of years.
What we've certainly noticed in the project is that because it is hard to run a company in Turkey, the quality of companies that survives are just much higher than there are in countries where it is easier to establish companies and continue. And I think even the UK compared to the US is similar in that way too. You know, a lot of management teams here, there's not many of them, but the ones that manage to survive, have really slogged through some hard times. So,
can I make a point on that? And it speaks to the entire panel, but one of the areas that I think traditional California VC failed and maybe continues to fail, and the UK to an extent as well, is more of the long tail investments. Clean tech 15, 20 years ago, it was proven that the model didn't work. And I think as it relates to this conversation, still a lot of long tail investments still don't fit within the traditional VC model. And I think that's where Europe is better, and potentially collaborations with Turkey are better at trying to keep a company operating on different forms of finance, particularly Innovate UK or Innovation as an example of that, to get businesses to the point where they are investable, and then you can see that exit cycle, right? Because the reality is some businesses, and some of the businesses in this room, aren't going to have your traditional 5-year payout. And I don't necessarily believe in the terms of the whole patient capital yet. People talk about it. The reality is that people have set rules around their fund and their investment. And the longer you can operate at a lower cost in a place like Turkey, partnering with something like the Newton Fund and developing your technology to the point where it could rapidly scale, the better. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes back to one of the things I was going to mention, and to your question about sort of why the UK. And I think in London in particular, but across the whole of the UK, you have a diversity of capital sources. We've talked a lot about VC, but I think it's really important for people not to come away thinking that VC is the only route to scale. There's, many more investments from routes like private equity, from routes like family funds, which are, very often located in, a few square miles of where we're sitting today.
corporate ventures.
Corporate ventures, Mum was saying earlier, corporate venturing is a really big thing. The other side to the corporates, of course, is that a lot of the innovation teams are based here. So if your model is a B2B and you want to be selling your innovative technology into a large enterprise client, actually there's a very good market for that right here, because you can actually go and meet the person who's leading the innovation portfolio for one of the large FTSE 100s. Those things are very unique to this market, and then allow you to do some of the things that Kristen was talking about, which is demonstrate that you've been able to capture that market here and use that as a bridge to access the US market.
Yes.
But can I add a comment? I agree. There's a lot of, we typically call it, again, American mindset, non-traditional financing. So that's your high net worth individuals, your Innovate UKs, any type of government funding, or people who don't value the company or set a valuation for the company. And it's great. I actually think, Precarium, the company I'm at, is actually funded by a high net worth individual. The problem is, and my advice to everyone is, plan your capital need before you take capital, if that makes any sense. Because the last thing you want to do is say you need 100 million and you're willing to take 5 million from a high net worth individual. Well, where are you getting the next 95? So I think I like the non-traditional route, particularly if it's non-dilutive, like government funding. But I think you have to plan your capital need before you start asking for capital.
And the danger, of course, is that if you take money at a high valuation early on, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're not going to be able to raise more money for the later stages. So that's a really dangerous path to go down.
And then the non-traditional route, they own equity in your company, but they don't reserve capital to continually fund the company to exit. So that's why planning your capital, your types of investors, non-dilutive, dilutive, whatever, money's money, by the way. It truly is, so take it. Just take it with care and know what kind of money you're taking.
And this actually is a great segue into the next step. But before we go into that, I want to tell the audience that soon we'll be getting into a Q&A, so please prepare your questions for the panel as we're discussing this next. We have about 10 minutes left. Okay, so actually I want to segue into what next for the TDEP companies, right? So they have been working together now for over a year. The program itself has been 2 years long. Some of them are already doing R&D together out of their own funding. Some of them have applied for money together. Some of them are so close to market that they're combining existing solutions together to actually market them and sell them to people. If we start on the R&D front, Priya, Innovate UK obviously is trying to help. What do you see Innovate UK doing in the long run for SMEs in the UK and SMEs that collaborate with SMEs in the UK?
Well, I mean, I actually don't think it's an answer that is just about Innovate UK. I mean, the whole of the UK economy is, in my view, a very SME-based economy in terms of where we're going to be in the long run. So we need to be helping support that sector. That will be a role for Innovate UK, of course, from one end of the equation, but it will be all parts of government and the ecosystem more broadly that should, and I hope will be, supporting those sorts of technologies to thrive. So from an R&D perspective, for companies who are still at that phase of their journey, I think it's, focus on how you're going to get that R&D to the point where it then becomes a viable technology to commercialize, whether you're doing that in Turkey or the UK, and then look at the path to commercialization. What does that look like? What does the company structure look like? What funding routes, to Kristen's point, what funding routes do you want to be accessing to be able to scale? And where are you going to do it and how are you going to do it? And to talk about a very obvious challenge that I think a lot of the partnerships in this room will be thinking about is how do you actually work that across boundaries and borders from a cultural perspective for your business? Do you need to be planning very actively to be getting together every quarter to make sure that you're connecting? The beauty of coronavirus is it's reminded us how easy it is to do video conferencing around the world. So, there's a whole opportunity there to be thinking right from the get-go about how do we keep the cultural unity of what we've been able to build through collaborating on a program like this.
Great. So keep communicating is the message there. Stephen.
Yeah, I think the other side is always have the eye to the customer, right? You alluded to it, but keep ensuring that what you're building together has a product market fit.
Yep.
Being brief because of my full of time.
Good, very good. Kristen?
Oh, everyone's going to think I'm such a capitalist. So I would say think of your next milestone, and what we call it in VC is your value inflection point. How much capital you need to get there, plus 10% or more. Usually plus 50%, the time. And then also, what are the exits like in your space? Is it all cash upfront deals? Is it partially upfront, back-end deals? Because what you want to do is marry up your valuation of the company with how much the companies in your space are worth. So those are my 3 things.
Great. Erman?
I think one of the most important thing for me is the competition. And the other one is how to protect your tech. It can be like a trade secret, it can be a patent. I think if you're running a global company or if you would like to expand to global, you will be facing competition. And you have to think how you're going to overcome that competition. And if you don't have a really strong, it can be a trade secret, as I say, or it can be a patent. If you cannot compete with your patent to other competitors, I think you're going to lose in the global area. So one of them is the competition, and the other one is how can you protect your tech and how can you put your tech in front of other competitors.
Okay, great.
All right, I'm going to remove this. Any questions from the floor?
For the panel? Don't be shy. Yes. Please state your name. David Hodge. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of threads. One is don't underestimate the management needed for whether you're an SME or a global player. If you don't have the right configuration of management and the right balance, you're not actually going to get off the launch pad, or you will get off and then fall over. Secondly, as an example of cross-border cooperation that's developing, In the autonomous vehicle sector in the UK, the arrival, the creation of Meridian, or Zenzik as they're now called, as being the sort of hub for all UK activity around autonomous vehicles, that's provided the means to identify where the UK can't do certain things. So, and then to go and look for those countries, those facilities that can do them. So, for example, if you look at test beds or testing sites, we're never going to have the same weather as Scandinavia in terms of winter, please. And at the same token, we're never going to be as as good as North Africa or Spain or any of the hot climates. Equally, in terms of the ability to share information, the autonomous vehicles are very heavily conditioned by their regulatory network and the way the road systems work. So there are some countries, believe it or not, who don't have roundabouts or circles. There are some countries, and I believe Turkey may be one of them, where the regulations for drivers on those roundabouts or circles are completely different.
Could you state the question, please?
So my question is, how are we going to capture the knowledge that's bound up already but isn't being tapped in order to make it of value to SMEs and international cooperation?
Who would like to take that one?
So I completely agree. The team is the number one. Sometimes a team could even get funded with just an idea. Because what investors want, particularly with the talent, is they want you to use the money correctly. They want you to fail fast and fail cheap with the capital that they give you and create intrinsic value with that capital. So not just spending it, but so your next valuation of your next round is a step up. So they want you to create intrinsic value with the capital. But I agree, the talent. I'm in pharmaceuticals, so I can't comment on the autonomous cars, but I would definitely buy one.
Okay, any other questions, please? Yeah. Yes?
Hi, Niraj Sarah from Innovate UK. So it's actually a very practical question. A lot of the partnerships here haven't got to the point of forming a joint venture. So in terms of raising funding, what would you advise them to do? Should they form a JV? Should it be led by one partner? And what are the factors you would advise them to take into consideration when making that decision?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on it's a lot of depends in that. Good consulting answer. I would say it depends at the level and scale of the organizations, right? Because an early stage investment in a JV is going to be a tricky one, right? Where does the IP sit? What are you investing in? What's the vehicle? I think and I think that problem should be solved beforehand if you're actually generating revenue and you found customers, right? Because who are you actually doing the deal with, and you solve a lot of those solutions. I think off the top of that, if you're going to go and form a JV as an early stage, then there are the alternative forms of finance to do that, whether that's through family offices or through private equity, as Priya mentioned. But I think it depends on where you're at. As an early stage, I think you need to create a separate company, put the IP into that as the two companies, even if the two companies are shareholders of it, and then go after investment in the same way as any other limited company.
I would certainly agree myself with that statement, and I see some nods there before from the panel. One question from a company here.
The term from Glycolans and Northumbria University. You have touched on different aspects, the companies and ecosystems in Turkey and the ecosystems in the UK, US and Europe, and also the companies from Turkey relocating these places. How about investment going from these places to Turkey? What is your perspective on that?
From UK? Do you want from UK to Turkey or Turkey to UK perspective?
No, investment from UK
To Turkey.
Look, I mean, I can't talk for the whole UK ecosystem, but I think there is a reality, particularly if we're talking about VC funding, which is that for a relatively early stage VC, they will invest very locally because of the support that they want to be giving to that business as they scale. That clearly changes as this company scales and you're looking at sort of series B, C, D funding, that everyone's open, and you were referencing, Sequoia investing in a Turkish business recently, so that's a great example of that. I think it's going to be really important for Turkey to be able to support that early stage ecosystem, perhaps through collaborations and some of the partnership investing funds that you were describing earlier, Aman, but then look to international investors for later stage funding. And perhaps one of the opportunities there is for the earlier stage investors that are Turkey-based to be building those links across, whether it's with European-based funds, whether it's with funds based on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, or funds based in China or wherever in the world, so that they can support their portfolio companies to make that bridge.
Can I add one more thing to that? I think the final thing, and it's important for Turkish companies or any international companies, is because of the EIS and SEIS, early stage investors are awash with deals right now. And they won't even look at Turkish companies that are traveling to the UK to seek investment until they've become UK companies that have a registered office and an address here and are actually pounding the pavement. You get a lot of companies that think, I'll relocate as soon as I get investment, and it never happens. I think the rare occasion is good deals are found, right? But for the most part, it's just not happening yet.
Can I just add one sentence?
That might be easy to use.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. One of the best way, I think, to get funded from the UK is finding a local investor in Turkey first, and just go with this VC to UK VCs, because as also Sam just explained, they invest really locally, and they would like to see someone who are convinced to invest in their local ecosystem. And then they will be, I think, more comfortable, I can say, to invest in a company in a foreign country.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to the panelists. I'm going to wrap up real quick here and say that the 4 points we said was keep communicating. That's the company's motto number 1 after TDEB. Keep an eye on the customer. Keep thinking about the business case. Marry your milestones and valuation with your exit opportunities. Okay, talk to Kristen more if you want to know exactly how to do that. And ensure you always are aware of and how you can overcome the competition, which was Erman's addition there. And from the floor, I think 2 take-home here is team. Think about how you can expand your team, maybe bring on some people that have done it before, even if they are advisors, scientific advisors or business advisors, board members. I definitely am happy to talk to all of you about how to build boards. I think that's very important. We haven't touched on that much. And last but not least, have boots on the ground. You want to continue working with the UK, think about how you can collaborate and keep some boots on the ground so you're close to the investors you want to get money from. Thank you to everyone, and thank you especially to the panelists.
Thank you.